Hi, everyone. My name's Elizabeth Burke. I am Chief Operating Officer with Global Action on Gun Violence. We're delighted to have you here. And I want to first introduce John Lowy. He's our founder and president. John?
Thanks, Becky, and thanks to everyone for joining Global Action on Gun Violence for this important conversation. It's my true privilege to introduce Representative Jamie Raskin, who will speak first. Representative Raskin, who I know as Jamie, first met when we were teenagers, just starting college. I believe Jamie was 16 years old. He may have been 17. But even if we hadn't met then, it did not take long for everyone on campus to know Jamie Raskin. We all knew him because even then he was a leader in fighting for democracy, peace, and justice in the United States and abroad. While it's usually hyperbole to say that someone has spent a lifetime fighting to make the world a better place, I actually know that to be true with Jamie Raskin. Though in candor, I don't know what Jamie was doing in elementary school. Perhaps he was a terror then. I doubt it. Jamie went on from Harvard to Harvard Law, where he was an editor of the Law Review, then was a constitutional law professor for 25 years and served 3 terms as Maryland State Senator. In 2017, he was elected to his current position as a representative for Maryland's 8th Congressional District, where I happen to live. He was famously the manager for the Senate trial of Donald Trump's second impeachment. Throughout his career, Representative Raskin has been one of the greatest champions for democracy, civil rights, and social justice, and that has included strong support for sensible and strong gun violence prevention policies. As he famously said once, "My ambition is not to be in the political center, it is to be in the moral center." He has authored several books, including the Washington Post best-selling Overruling Democracy, the Supreme Court versus the American People, the highly acclaimed We the Students, Supreme Court cases for and about America's students, and the New York Times #1 bestseller, Unthinkable: Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. Congressman Raskin has one of the great minds in American political life, but has an even bigger heart. I'm so thankful to call him my representative and my friend, and we at Global Action on Gun Violence are so thankful that he's joining us here today for a few minutes in his very busy schedule. Representative Raskin, the floor is yours.
John, thank you for those beautiful remarks, really. Very moving to me since we've known each other for the vast majority of our lives. I take equal pride and joy and delight in your remarkable career and in the recent breakthrough successes you've had ever since you launched the new group. It's pretty amazing to me. And so thank you for inviting me to spend a few moments with you guys. Delighted to be with you, Elizabeth and Alejandro, and I'm just thrilled about all the people who've gathered for global action against gun violence, and various lawyers and gun safety advocates from around the country, around the world. I don't know if John remembers, but I actually bumped into him in the airport right after he argued in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit in Mexico's favor. So the decision had not been rendered yet, but I think he felt good about the oral argument and sent me the briefing in the case, and I was just blown away by it and not surprised at all that the First Circuit ruled in favor of Mexico. I should tell you as a member of Congress that we feel as if the gun industry, through the National Rifle Association and our friends in the Republican Party, have put us in a straitjacket. On the one side, they've made it nearly impossible to enact any meaningful, substantial gun safety laws because of their orthodoxy about the Second Amendment. Now, it's a fraudulent orthodoxy. They assert that the meaning of the Second Amendment is that the people have the right to overthrow the government. And because of that, the people must have an arsenal equal to that of the government. Of course, our Constitution is not a pro-insurrection document embodied in invisible ink in the Second Amendment. Our Constitution is an anti-insurrectionary instrument, which in more than a half dozen places takes a strong stand against insurrection and against revolutionary violence against our government. We do not have the only constitution on earth which somehow contains the recipe for destroying the Constitution and the government. And yet, every day, one of my colleagues will get up on the House floor. Not long ago, Lauren Boebert got up and said that the Second Amendment has nothing to do with hunting unless you're talking about hunting tyrants. And Chip Roy from Texas, he says that the Constitution gives the people every right of weaponry and armaments that the government has. And Matt Gaetz from Florida says that the Second Amendment gives the people the right to maintain an armed rebellion against the government if the government acts in an unjust or tyrannical way. Well, that's not how our Constitution actually works. It's wrong. But that ideology has a stranglehold on our ability to get laws passed. And on the other side, in terms of civil liability, because we think of criminal liability and civil liability as the principal mechanisms by which we hold bad actors responsible, they've tied us into knots with the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, which at least purports to establish complete civil immunity and safety from lawsuits for the gun industry. And now you guys have found a way to create some daylight here by having Mexico, which is obviously severely affected by the gun traffic south, to hold the gun manufacturers responsible. And I don't want to get into all the details of it, although I've been fastidiously studying all of the pleadings and the First Circuit decision. And I just want to thank you for this landmark litigation. I want to thank you, Alejandro, on behalf of the people of Mexico for bringing this lawsuit, which provides a lot of hope for people in Mexico, which of course I think has just one gun store in the entire country and sells like 50 guns a year. Your entire gun violence problem is pretty much created by the United States. And if we care about our brothers and sisters in Mexico and we care about the fentanyl problem and the drug traffickers here, then we will work to intervene to stop the flow of guns down and fentanyl back into our country, which is happening because of the criminal syndicates and the drug gangs, which operate with near impunity in some places because of the fact that they have the illegal weapons and arms that are being trucked down there from the United States. So we are deeply invested in the success of this litigation. As the ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, and I hope the chair of the Oversight Committee in the next Congress, we will be working very hard to shine a light on this connection between the gun industry up here and the organized crime syndicates and the drug dealers in Mexico. And so a lot rides on this decision and what you guys can make come out of it. And we're invested generally in making sure that every industry, not just guns, but every industry is forced to pay for the costs that they impose on society. And this legislation that the NRA and the gun industry was able to get out of Congress through the use of their political influence and campaign contributions and so on, disrupts that basic principle. we have to make sure that every industry is being held accountable for its own civil torts and wrongs. If not, the rest of society ends up subsidizing it. And that's what's going on today, that American society, Mexican society, societies all over the world are essentially subsidizing the gun industry for the bloodshed and for the damages that they inflict on all of our societies. So I wish you very well. I'll get to hang out for a little bit and hear what's going on, and I'm very excited to hear everything that's happening. I hope that we will be able to work together in the future, both so we can tighten up the criminal laws, so we can reduce gun violence, and also make sure that we can vindicate the basic principle of holding people and corporations accountable for the costs of their own business model. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Jon.
Well, thank you so much, and for those comments. You really hit a lot of the major points that the rest of us will struggle to communicate much less effectively, but we'll do our best. And we understand that you have a democracy to save and other important work. So certainly understand if you that you have to leave soon. But let me turn it back to Becky Burke and moderate this conversation.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you so much, Congressman Raskin. And welcome again, everybody. Just a few things, housekeeping at the very beginning. I want to let you know that this session is being recorded. And if you have questions, you can ask your questions through the Q&A feature, which should be along the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to get to as many questions coming in from the audience as we can. You've met Jon already, and I want to introduce you to Alejandro Celerio, who is the head legal advisor for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico. Alejandro, thank you so much for joining us, and more importantly, for being the top lawyer involved in this extremely important litigation industry case. So let me just start with a few questions. So in August of 21, Alejandro, Mexico did something that no other country has done before. They really led the world in this, and they brought a lawsuit against the US-based gun industry. Can you tell us a little bit about how and why Mexico decided to take this step?
Yeah, certainly. And thank you very much before all to Global Action for the invitation. And Congressman, it's a real pleasure and wonderful to listen to you. Your presence in this event just shows how important the issue is for both countries and how we're together. Some people might have said that we're suing the U.S. and this is against the American citizens or against the American government. No, it's a tort law, civil litigation. The fact that we have Congressman Raskin with us just shows that we're playing by the U.S. rules, the judicial system, and we're doing it because it's important and it's urgent. How did we come with this idea of doing it? The government of Mexico for decades, but starting in 2005, when the assault weapons ban expired, and when PLCAA, PLACA, was enacted, there was a rise in homicides and presence of heavy armor, like long range and high caliber rifles and weapons in Mexico. The cartels started acquiring very heavy weaponry, and the armed violence that we live today in Mexico started in this dynamic around 2006, 2007. So for years, we explored a way of stopping the armed violence. We're still doing it. We work with the US government. We do it ourselves. We try to prosecute those that commit crimes in Mexico. But we always had that sense of there was a missing link. There was something else that we needed to do. And if we think of all the actors involved in the arms trafficking from the United States to Mexico, in the order of 70%, according to the ATF and other government reports, the industry. We hadn't addressed the involvement of the industry in this issue. And if you remember, August the 3rd, 2019, the attack in a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. That was the waking call after that issue, when we're looking for ways of stopping this from happening again, because the shooter, if you all remember, wanted to kill as many Mexicans as possible. So we all thought, like, if this individual that wanted to kill as many Mexicans as possible, right at the border, El Paso, Texas, how many others could acquire weapons on the internet just freely? And when we were looking for like establishing our legal argument, we met Jon, and we piggyback on all his experience suing the gun industry and trying to bring the industry to accountability. And that's why when we started putting all the information together, there was a second incident in 2019, the so-called Culiacanazo in Mexico. There's a kingpin in Mexico, El Chapo's son, Ovidio. He got arrested, and his organized crime group, the group of criminals that trying to protect him, showed openly in streaming live on the news these weapons that are not sold in Mexico. As Congressman Raskin mentioned, in Mexico we only have one store. Those weapons are not sold in Mexico illicitly. They are trafficked from the United States. So that's why we got it. We discussed with Jon, like, can we use this theory of civil liability to do something bigger and address the bigger issue of trafficking into Mexico, but also something that eventually in the conversation has popped up, the wide availability of firearms throughout Mexico, the region, in a moment when there's xenophobic inspired messages and the risk that our diaspora face in the United States. Because just as the killer in El Paso, Texas was able to buy a firearm and kill Mexicans, in the same way criminals that are in Mexico can access that same weapons through straw purchasers in stores in the United States. So that's why, and when we worked together with Jon Lowy and the other team of attorneys, and we put together this lawsuit, and we decided to do it. It was just, and we needed to do it, and we felt confident that differently from what other people thought, suing in U.S. courts wouldn't put any tension in the bilateral relation with the U.S., or it wouldn't be look bad because we're playing by the rules of U.S. courts in English under the U.S. legal system, and we feel very happy that 2 and something months apart from 2.5 years apart from when we filed the lawsuit, we keep talking about this issue, and we've been bringing more attention to the issue of the illicit trafficking of weapons from the U.S. to Mexico.
Thank you, Alejandro. And it's such an important issue to point out, as most of the guns recovered in Mexico in the hands of the cartel are coming from the United States. So, Jon, can you tell us a little bit about how important it was when the U.S. Appeals Court ruled in Mexico's favor? And can you explain what the court actually decided and said?
Sure. Well, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit in Boston unanimously reversed a decision of the trial court, and the trial court had held Mexico's lawsuit was prohibited by the law that Representative Raskin mentioned, the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. And the First Circuit, reversing that decision, held that Mexico's allegations supported a exception to PLACA, PLCAA, which is called the predicate exception, which essentially says that gun companies knowingly violate a law and thereby cause harm. They are not protected by this unique law that otherwise shields the gun industry. So, because of that decision, now the case, we believe, will go forward. There's some other steps we can talk about, and we can talk about what it can achieve. I mean, I think, having litigated cases against the gun industry for over 26 years now, this decision is the most important and the most impactful legal ruling ever in the gun space.
Yes, and Alejandro, can you tell me how is the government of Mexico and the people that you speak with in Mexico responding to the lawsuit?
Well, I have to say that at the beginning there was not a lot of people thought that it was going to proceed, perhaps because of the sophistication of the argument and because of PLACA. A lot of people thought that PLACA would offer a complete immunity and that our effort was pointless. Now there's more and more people very interested in the issue that around 70% of the weapons found in Mexico come from the United States. But they're also looking into the industry and asking themselves, like, why is the industry not doing something? Do they really need to be sued to stop this? Wouldn't other industry, like the automotive industry or any other kind of industry, make changes to protect their reputation and their business? If the business is licit in the United States, wouldn't they be more careful that their firearms do not end in the hands of criminals in Mexico? So I think the sense in Mexico in general, but also in the region, and this is because of the great work of Global Action, more and more people are asking, what else can we do so the industry make necessary and urgent changes so the product remains in U.S. jurisdictions where they're supposed to be sold and used, not trafficked to Mexico or other countries in the Caribbean or Canada.
Yeah. And that's exactly what GAGV does with the outside game, bringing international pressure to attempt a reform of the gun industry, which has been blocked, as Congressman Raskin so ably told us. So, Jon, as you're looking at this win, can you talk a little bit? We've had several questions about what this might mean for the perhaps repeal of PLACA or other lawsuits coming from abroad to help pressure the gun industry to reform and make us all safer.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is certainly an important precedent. You know, whenever a federal appeals court speaks on an issue, it's impactful, and particularly this decision is very well thought out. So I do think, it should have influence. And, as Representative Raskin was explaining, tort litigation has been a well-recognized tool for public health and public safety in all sorts of industries. What it does is it forces an industry to internalize the social cost of their conduct. And so it shouldn't just be all profit. You have some cases involving the trafficking guns to Mexico where you have gun dealers selling dozens of guns to obvious gun traffickers. Well, if the dealer doesn't have to pay for some of the costs of that harm, it's all profit. And so all the incentives, the business incentives, are going to lead to more of those irresponsible sales. And so, a victory like this, litigation like this, can force, a different calculus. It can force incentivize companies to act more responsibly. And that's what this is all about. This lawsuit, government of Mexico has been clear from the beginning. It's not to eliminate the Second Amendment. It's not to eliminate guns. It's not to attack any laws. It's simply that there's a right way to do business and a wrong way to do business. And this lawsuit and lawsuits like it will lead to the right way to do business, safer sales of guns, which will lead to less trafficking. And that will lead to both reducing gun violence and gun crime in Mexico, but also in the United States, because it's exactly the same practices that are fueling the crime gun pipeline to the cartels that are supplying criminals and gangs in the United States. And those are exactly the same practices that are supplying traffickers, arming the gangs in Jamaica and in Bahamas and in Haiti. It's also leading to trafficking in Canada, throughout the region. So if we can get reforms to gun industry practices, it will reduce gun violence and organized crime, throughout the region. and that reduces the flow of fentanyl here in the U.S. It reduces violence, it spurs migration, and all sorts of other issues.
Exactly. And Alejandro, can you maybe just outline for us a little bit how you would see this case impacting life in Mexico as it continues through the courts?
Certainly. Sadly, the outcome of these legal efforts won't bring to life those that have been killed by firearm shots or harm, or those that have psychological distress because of the armed violence in Mexico. But what we want is change of practices in this industry. If the industry changes the way they do things, and I see a question about it, the Budweiser, Jim Beam, being sued for people that drink. Our argument in the lawsuit, and this is what we would like to do, is that for the industry to be more careful in how they do their business. They know or should know that their products end in the hands of criminals. How? With a serial number, governmental reports, even the videos that criminal organizations upload in social media or even in live streaming. If the industry changes the way they conduct their business, they're more careful to who they sell, who's the final consumer, what is the final use of those weapons. Mexico will see a dramatic decrease in firearms in the numbers, but also in the firepower that cartels have. With a decrease in such a availability of firearms for the criminal organizations, the situation of armed violence in Mexico would change. Of course, there's currently around 4 million firearms in Mexico in the hands of civilians. Those weapons won't disappear with the decision in this lawsuit. But we would stem the flow of illicit firearms coming to the hands of criminals. And the power of the state of Mexico as a state, as a country, as a government, would be a lot more effective of what is already is, and less people die, less public servants would die trying to protect citizens. So the whole dynamic of what we live in Mexico, being afraid of being shot, being afraid of being kidnapped or being robbed, the confrontation between cartels, criminal organizations in Mexico, that would slowly decrease, and eventually we would have the country peace that we want.
Thank you. And Jon, can you talk a little bit about perhaps the dealer case as well as what you view as an outcome potentially on a Supreme Court cert petition? Maybe go over Supreme Court cert petition possibility first.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's the next step in the Massachusetts case against gun manufacturers. That the gun manufacturer defendants have said publicly that they are going to seek review to the U.S. Supreme Court. And for non-lawyers, you should know that a lot of people seek review before the U.S. Supreme Court. Very, very, very few of them actually get that review. It's something like 2% of the petitions that are made to the Supreme Court are granted. And so we'll see what happens. I think it is very unlikely that the Supreme Court will take this case. And I think the much more likely scenario is that the court denies the petition, and then we go back down to the trial court to have a number of other issues that are before the court, and then discovery, which is the process where we get, Mexico is entitled to get documents, emails, sworn testimony, other evidence from the gun industry, basically to assemble the case, which then be presented at trial. So now there is a chance the Supreme Court could take review of this case. I think not only is it unlikely that the court will take the case, but I think if they took the case, I think they would uphold the First Circuit's ruling. But again, only time will tell about that. And then as far as the dealer case, Mexico filed a second case, which GAGV is also co-counsel for the government on. And that was filed in federal court in Arizona against a few gun dealers for their role in the trafficking of guns across the border. And just a couple of weeks ago, we argued in federal court there against the defendant's motion to dismiss, many of the same arguments that the First Circuit rejected. And we expect a decision in the coming weeks or months in that case. And then that would go through the same path of discovery and ultimately, we believe, trial.
Okay, thank you. We are getting a few questions about the meaning of PLACA. Can you maybe explain the law, the special liability law, and also how the First Circuit dealt with that and what the ruling held specifically about PLACA? Is Mexico immune from this law?
Sure. Well, I'll start. I mean, first, PLACA gives the gun industry special protection that no other industry in America has. You know, doctors, nurses, churches, whatever group you want to name, they do not have special protection from civil liability the way gun manufacturers and gun dealers do. However, the big question is, how broad is that protection? We know they get special protection, but how far does it extend? And in my view, PLACA should be read in a way that's very narrow, that actually gives the gun industry very limited protection. However, there have been a number of courts that have held that provides pretty broad protection from liability, and trial court in this case is one of those courts. The First Circuit, I think, had a much more reasonable and correct interpretation of PLACA, and that gets to what the court decided. That court, the First Circuit, decided that Mexico's case was allowed under what's known as the predicate exception, which essentially disentitles companies who knowingly violate the law. Let's call it protection of the Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. It certainly does not protect unlawful commerce and arms, and that's what Mexico was alleging.
And can you talk about, is there any other cases that are similarly coming up? Perhaps you could fill people in on the case in Canada.
Well, the case in Canada is another case in which GAGV is involved. In that case, as foreign legal counsel, and that is a lawsuit that was brought by victims of a mass shooting in Toronto, known as the Danforth massacre, and the victims have brought a suit against Smith & Wesson, who's a manufacturer of that gun, arguing that Smith & Wesson is liable in that case for the way it designed the gun, that the gun should have had safety features which would prevent criminals, and in this case, a thief, from firing the gun. So it's a different theory of liability. And one thing that's interesting about that case is, since it was brought in Canada, even though it was against a US company, there was not even an argument that PLACA could protect Smith & Wesson. So that case is proceeding in Ontario court without any PLACA protection.
And Alejandro, can you tell us a little bit about next steps in terms of this case and working with immigration issues, and how the gun trafficking issues worsen all the fentanyl trafficking and the immigration issues that Mexico deals with?
Yeah, certainly. In terms of the litigation, it will continue its course, as Jon has described, potential Supreme Court litigation, and if not, go to the federal court in Boston, the same with Tucson. So we're going to keep working. Somebody was asking, I tried to answer, we'll have elections. We're going to change precedent in Mexico. And regardless of the political outcome of the elections, this effort will continue. We have the resources, and we have the instructions to continue with these litigations until the end. We know the judicial system in the United States, like in any other country, might take its time, and it doesn't actually adjust to political terms, but we will continue. I think that's important to highlight that. Other conversations that have been ignited because of this litigation, the relation between immigration, forced displacement, and weapons. We have the case of Haiti. The situation of Haiti, political unrest and armed violence context, is produced by weapons trafficked from Florida, mainly. There's even a resolution of the Security Council talking about this and imposing sanctions to those that facilitate the trafficking of weapons to Haiti. So Haitians, the nationals of Haiti, will escape this violence. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to the U.S. to connect with their families, to find jobs, to find protection. The U.S. is still that shining lighthouse calling for people to come to its protection. So the armed violence caused by the firearms traffic from the United States is going to generate displacement and migration. And it's very ironic that those that support the wide availability of weaponry and the trafficking of those weapons into the region, it's the same people that complain about irregular migration. So if you don't like irregular migration, you should do something so the weapons stay in the United States and do not leave its jurisdiction. On the fentanyl, like any other trafficking of substances and the trafficking of people, if you have a criminal with a handgun, it's going to be harder for that criminal to face the power of the government. And when they commit a crime and they have a handgun, perhaps they can control certain area, a certain number of people. But then, when that same criminal has a Barrett 50, that is, with that Barrett 50, that criminal is able to shut down a helicopter. Imagine the threat, the fear that that criminal can impose to his victims, and how hard it will be for the government to arrest that individual. When we talk about try to explain the context of armed violence on Mexico, I refer to the incident in Waco, Texas. Remember when a group of certain beliefs compound in a building and with firearms, and the ATF and the FBI and other agencies lost members trying to arrest those people. It is the same in Mexico. In Mexico, we cannot just kill or neutralize an objective. We're a country with a rule of law, human rights and criminal law. That person has to be arrested, put under the presumption of innocence, prosecute them, and face a criminal procedure. We're going to do it. We're going to arrest them. But again, if they have a caliber 50, just like in Waco, Texas, it's going to be a lot more harder. And it's going to cost lives, human lives, to arrest and put that person before justice. Some additional things that are happening. Conversations in Europe. A lot of the weapons that we see in Mexico and in the region come from Europe. They were imported to the United States. So we're asking European companies, European parliamentarians, when you export, there's a licit, is legal, transfer of firearms to a civilian market. You should ask yourself, do some downstream due diligence. Where are your weapons actually going? Are they staying in Florida for the use of the legal use in the US for shooting to a blank or hunting, or are they ending in the hands of criminals in Mexico? And we're also resorting to the inter-American system. We brought a request for advisory opinion regarding the gun industry in the region and its impact in human rights. So this litigation, and hand in hand with global action, has opened other conversations about the importance of keeping the trade of firearms responsible, accountable, and with transparency.
And Becky,
Thank
can
you
I
so
jump in for a second to follow up
course.
about the 50 caliber that Alejandro mentioned? I think a lot of people probably don't know that means. And it's really extraordinary that there are these 50 caliber sniper rifles, which are true military weapons. They cost several $1,000s retail, have a range of about a mile, shoot down helicopters, they can shoot through airplanes' fuselage. For decades, we've known that they are sought after by terrorists. Osama bin Laden was looking to get these sorts of weapons. And the cartels in Mexico are using traffickers to buy them in the US, and they're using them to shoot down Mexican military helicopters. And these are guns that an 18-year-old in the United States who is not allowed to buy a beer, if he passes a background check, can buy one or several of these, really truly military style rifles. So it is really astounding that they are, so freely available in the U.S., particularly given that we know how they're being used by the cartels to assault police, military.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Alejandro. It's really inspiring to talk about this case in Mexico. The government of Mexico is truly leading the world in attempting to reform the pipeline of firearms that are going out of the United States. And it is sort of validation of GAGV's new approach to try and reframe the gun debate. We very much appreciate you coming, and I'm just going to turn it over to John here at the end.
Sure. Well, thank you all for attending. Thanks so much, Representative Raskin, for your inspiring words and your leadership. Thank you, Alejandro, for your extraordinary leadership. And as Representative Raskin said at the beginning, really thanks to the government and people of Mexico for leading the world against gun trafficking by taking these bold steps that no other country has taken, and that the United States will benefit from every bit as much as Mexico. So thank you for that. And I want to thank Becky Burke for moderating as well, and doing such an extraordinary job and being such a tremendous colleague and partner at GAGV. And back to you, the audience. Thanks for attending, and also thank you for being a part of our effort to reduce gun violence and to save lives, both in the United States, Mexico, and throughout the world. We at GAGV have very ambitious plans to bring and litigate more impactful cases and to reframe the gun debate. And we can't do that without you. So I would ask for you to please consider giving to Global Action on Gun Violence. Today, there's the link. You can go to actiononguns.org/donate. And also reach out to support in any way you can. Again, thank you all so much, and see you next time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.